Yo, what's up guys? We're back with another video today, and guys, in today's video, I want to talk about some of the best rivalries that we've had in UFC history. Now, I do want to say, I'm only going to be talking about some of the best rivalries that have happened in like the past decade, so nothing from like the 1990s like Pride or like the early 2000s. Like, there's some good rivalries there, don't get me wrong, but I want more focus about some of the more recent rivalries, right? Anywhere from 2015 to now, I'm gonna be including as some of my favorite rivalries. But without further ado, guys, let's get into them. Alright, starting us off, we have Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. One of the best rivalries we've had in recent years, I'm gonna be straight up honest. It might be my favorite rivalry, to be honest, because this goes beyond just MMA. This goes literally to like any other sport, because these guys used to compete back in kickboxing, and Alex Pereira beat him like twice. One of them was by KO, and the other one was a little bit of a controversial win. Regardless, that's still a win for Pereira. Adesanya then leaves kickboxing. He goes to MMA, right? He becomes a champion. Alex Pereira sees this, and he's like, oh wait, that's the guy who I KO'd last time. I could beat him again. And then goes to MMA and beats him again. And then Adesanya, though, in the rematch, he finally gets the win over him. And now, technically in MMA, they're 1-1. And I want nothing else right now besides these two having a trilogy. Listen, I would like to see Alex Pereira go up to heavyweight. I'd love to see him do all these other stuff to like further his legacy. But I want more. If I had to choose what I want now, more than anything, I want Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya for a trilogy, man. Their fights are so exciting and they're so iconic, man. I've seen so many highlights of the Alex Pereira like TKOing Israel Adesanya in their first fight, and then I see so many times Israel Adesanya KOing Alex Pereira. Like both of their fights are just so legendary, man. Like, we need a trilogy, not just for the fans, but also just to settle it as far as MMA goes. Alex Pereira still has like 3 wins over Adesanya, so it's gonna take Adesanya like 2 more fights in order for him to be even with Alex Pereira, so you know. But still, regardless, every time these guys fight, it's so exciting, man. Alright, Conor McGregor versus Khabib. Now, as far as this fight goes, this is one of the biggest rivalries, if not the biggest rivalry ever in UFC history. And this rivalry has so much like rippling effects. For one, in my opinion, this is like the definitive moment where the Dagestanians like really become like mainstream. This is where pretty much everybody knows like who Khabib is. And this fight still is having rippling effects across the MMA scene. Conor McGregor can't forget about this fight for the life of him. I literally just saw a video of like Conor spitting on a fan after he said, let's go Khabib, in front of Conor McGregor. Yeah, Conor McGregor can't get over the loss he had over Khabib, man. It like, this fight really had like rippling effects over the years, like 7 years later, and it's still talked about, man. And as far as the fight itself went, it was a little bit boring, I'm not gonna lie. Like I kind of thought it was gonna be more exciting, but when this fight first got made, I was extremely excited about it, and I still am glad this fight happened. Of course, like, I wanted this fight more than anything, guys. But the fight itself was kind of boring. It was mostly just Khabib dominating Conor McGregor, which was fun, don't get me wrong. But, you know, it was just a lot of grappling and all that stuff. And to be honest, I don't know if there's ever going to be a fight that's ever going to top off this. As far as, like, how big this was and just, like, the heatedness of it. But maybe besides, like, Jones and DC. Like, as far as, like in the next couple of years, I don't think there's going to be any, like, big rivalry or big matchup that's going to surpass this. Because this was something beyond, like, the comprehensions of just MMA. This was, like, everyone was talking about this fight, man. Alright, Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figueiredo. This one is a very underrated one. I would say this is the most underrated rivalry on here, guys. This one doesn't get talked about. Very similar to flyweight division. No one talks about that division. But, you know, as far as this one went, this is, like, honestly really exciting. Like, these two always had wars when they fought each other. It was constantly a back and forth scrap, and it would take 4 fights for them to actually finish the rivalry. First of all, I think that's the first time, as far as like the UFC title goes, or just like any rivalry in general, where they've had to do 4 fights in order to settle it. Yes, Adesanya and Pereira had 4 fights, but I'm talking about in MMA, guys. Not like in all our other sports. Like, I'm just talking about as far as MMA goes. These guys had to fight 4 times in order to settle their rivalry. And Brandon Moreno would eventually come out on top. And these two, they don't hate each other. They don't, like, trash talk each other. they just fight for the love of the game, and they always have exciting fights. I feel like that's why most people don't talk about this one, because, you know, people like to talk about rivalries that have, like, a lot of trash talking, a lot of, like, bad blood between each other. But this one didn't really have bad blood. Like, the two had a lot of respect towards each other. No really, like, disrespect or anything like that. It was just some good sportsmanship, and whenever they fought, they had good scraps. Alright, now going from, like, probably the most respectable rivalry to the most toxic, most violent, like, whatever you describe this rivalry, it was Jones versus Daniel Cormier. First of all, like, these two absolutely hate each other, and I still think they do. Even though they try to, like, act professional and all that stuff, they both still hate each other. Or at least Daniel Cormier does. I know Jon Jones tries to act like, oh, I don't hate DC. I don't hate DC. It's just so BS. We all know. We all know that Jones hates DC. At least I think he doesn't like DC still. I mean, they both probably moved on from it because, like, they're both doing different things now. But still, there's probably still that bitterness from both sides, I feel. And, like, when these two were fighting, when these two were in the division and were trying to win over one another, there was a lot of animosity between these two. Both of them, like, both of these guys were extremely competitive, I feel. And they wanted to, like, prove who was, like, the better of the two, in my opinion, at least, how I view this, like, rivalry. And, like, their first fight, like, most people when they talk about Jones and DC, they usually talk about their second fight, or at least when Daniel Cormier became the champion, because that was really when this rivalry really started to begin. Like, obviously, the first fight, they both had, like, a little scrap before, like, the actual fight, but I feel like, especially when Daniel Cormier became the champion because Jones got stripped, there was a lot more, like, debate and all that stuff. People were calling Daniel Cormier, like, the fake champion, while Jon Jones was, like, returning back to the octagon. Which is crazy in hindsight, because now everybody loves DC, or at least most people do. Unless you're, like, MMHA. I like MMHA, don't get me wrong. But, like, nowadays people have a lot more respect towards Daniel Cormier. And especially, like, the career he had. Because, like, the dude became a double champion. He became, like, he's the second best, like, light heavyweight ever. I think he's better than Alex Pereira as far as his legacy goes. And but back then, most people didn't really like Daniel Cormier, to be honest. Which is, for me, I didn't watch MMA back then. But to me, from someone who's, like, researching all this stuff, the fact that, like, people didn't like Daniel Cormier back then is really surprising to me. But yeah, this was probably the most, like heated rivalry, I think. Besides maybe Conor McGregor and Khabib, because those two genuinely hated each other. Like, they still hate each other now, 7 years later. And even though I think these two, they don't like each other still, I think that they have the maturity and, like, they wouldn't try to, like, get into a fight with each other. They would be adults, basically. That's what I'm getting at. Alright, now a recent rivalry we had, Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. I feel like a lot of people are going to look back on this and they're going to be like, oh my god, this was, like, actually such a massive rivalry. Because we have to remember something. So, Topuria KOs Volkanovski, one of everyone's favorite fighter in the division, or at least in the sport at that time. And people don't like Ilia Topuria. Then people are like, they're not necessarily as excited with Topuria and Max Holloway, because that was going to be the next matchup. Like, let's be real, there was no one at that time who deserves, like, the title more than Holloway. And then Max Holloway KOs Justin Gaethje back at 300, puts on a masterclass, and then people are like, oh my god, this is actually going to be so exciting. There is a legitimate chance that Holloway can beat Topuria. And then it eventually gets announced and everybody loses their mind. And then when the fight actually happens, like, let's also not forget, the fight between these two was, like, actually very competitive. You know, like, they were actually, like, relatively close on the feet. And it was just that Topuria's power gave him the advantage and was enough for him to win the fight by TKOing Max Holloway. Like, nobody does that to Max Holloway. Nobody does that to Max Holloway. Who's ever KO'd Max Holloway? Nobody. Topuria KOing Max Holloway was, like, actually insane. And yeah, there was just so much, like, hype going into this one. Like, this is one of those ones that I feel like a lot of people are gonna look back on and be like, oh my god, this was actually massive. Now we have another Conor McGregor rivalry. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. Now, to me, this is kind of like, this was like the biggest rivalry before Conor McGregor and Khabib happened, I feel. I don't feel like most people talk about this one as much nowadays, but, like, first of all, Both of their fights are extremely iconic when they fought, like Nate Diaz submitting Conor McGregor, while Conor McGregor was like at his prime and arguably at the highest of his career, or at least up to that point. And then for Nate Diaz to go and submit him, also on a 2 weeks notice, let's not forget that, is extremely impressive. And it also brought Nate Diaz into the stardom power. And then they have the rematch, and it's one of the best fights ever in the UFC. And Conor McGregor is just able to get the win over Nate Diaz. And then Conor McGregor does better things in his career, while Nate Diaz keeps like hovering around his star power. People still like Nate Diaz. I'm a Nate Diaz fan. I don't care what anyone says. I think Nate Diaz is really cool. I feel like this one doesn't get talked about as much compared to Conor and Khabib, but both of their fights were extremely like important as far as the UFC history goes. Alright, and the final one we have is Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. This one is also a very recent one, but this one isn't just about Islam and Charles Oliveira. This one's more just like Dagestan versus Brazil. Like, Dagestan, Brazil, I don't know why, but like every time I watch a card, there's always like one fight between a Dagestanian and a Brazilian. It doesn't, like, I don't know why, but that's always something I see on these cards. And they just keep matchmaking these guys over and over again from like these regions. And I feel like the biggest one of all of them was like Islam versus Charles Oliveira, which was an extremely like anticipated fight. And Islam was able to get the win. And now we're going to get another big one between Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. And then literally this fight night card, we had Said Nurmagomedov versus Vinicius Oliveira, another Dagestanian versus Brazilian matchup. You know, there's always like whenever I see a fight that has a Dagestanian and a Brazilian against each other, I'm like, hell yeah, that's gonna be a good ass fight right there. Cause like they always like, for some reason, they always have like these like exciting fights. I don't know why. I just really enjoy just watching a Dagestanian versus Brazilian matchup. I know I just said that like 10,000 times, but you get the point. It's really exciting. But guys, that is me covering some of the best rivalries in UFC history. Let me know what you guys thought were some of the best rivalries as far as recently goes. Leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Peace!